We're going to call the meeting to order of the Downtown Facility Special Committee. It's Tuesday, February 13th.
You're muted.
9 a.m.
Start over.
Start over.
Oh, I'm sorry. He's ready now?
He's ready now.
Okay. I heard the recording. Okay, good morning. We're calling the meeting to order of the Downtown Facility Special Committee. It's February 13th. It's 9:04. And we have quorum, and we have Mike Lane, Rich John, Veronica Pillar, Greg Mezzi, myself, Susan Curry, and Deborah Dawson. We've got Ann Corman on Zoom, and we're going to start things off. Is there any changes to the agenda? I don't see any. We do have some comments from the public, and the first person to speak is Jennifer. I'm not sure if it's Minner or Minor, but.
It's Minner, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jenny Minner. I'm an associate professor in the Department of City and Regional Planning at Cornell, but I'm speaking not from that position, but as a citizen of the town of Ithaca and as one of the founding partners of Circularity, Reuse, and Zero Waste Development, or CROWD. And I would like to speak on prioritizing sustainability and innovation in the new government center. I'm commenting both with excitement and concern. I believe that there's an important opportunity here in thinking about the new government center. And I encourage you, in fact, implore you to do two things, which is one, engage a design team in thinking through options for the site on Tioga Street before deciding on removal of buildings, and second, to engage the community and specifically the City of Ithaca and stakeholders within the historic district and the ILPC before moving forward. I hope that that design team can be charged with thinking about a full spectrum of reuse before deconstruction or demolition. I fear that also the discussion of deconstruction is not specific enough. I note that previously on Tioga Street, there was a building that was demolished with some salvage, and that was called deconstruction. And deconstruction is the systematic dismantling of buildings so that as many of the materials can be reused as possible. I think that's a great thing. But before that, even better is to conserve the embodied carbon within existing buildings. And I hope that all options are considered there. If it's not possible to preserve whole buildings, it often is possible to incorporate elements of those buildings, foundations, structural elements, materials in the new design. There are lots of options to consider, and I think it would be best practice to have a site plan that is specific before proceeding with either demolition or deconstruction of buildings. I think it's an incredible opportunity, whether you decide on a preservation scenario or incorporating large elements from the existing buildings. If deconstruction is necessary, that is also an opportunity, but it takes careful planning. And I hope that this decision is not rushed and that there are not efforts to circumvent working with the community, because this will have a large environmental impact, and it needs to be thought through, and sustainability really does mean working with all the communities who are affected by the proposed development. And also, I think it's important not to leave a vacant lot potentially for many years on the site, particularly when there's parking just down the road in the area owned by Tompkins County where a building was removed. It's not really sustainable to just plan for a surface parking lot that will affect that district, potentially longer term if there are stalls in design and construction. So please consider a full spectrum of reuse. Please consider having a site plan in place and consider that you may be using state and federal funds to fund that government center. And in doing so, you really need to consider all of the impacts. And I don't want to be a downer. I'm very excited for Tompkins County to really demonstrate its leadership here locally and hopefully statewide and nationally in applying a full spectrum of reuse and considering embodied carbon. And thank you for the opportunity to speak. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jennifer. We have another person to comment. It's Susan Holland.
Good morning, everyone. As you know, I'm Susan Holland. I work for Historic Ithaca. I'm the director there. And as you know, we work with existing buildings, and we also work with developments of new buildings, especially in historic districts for the best possible outcomes for the community. We're excited about the possibilities of the new government center and to work with you. I'm here today to offer some suggestions about the project itself because it is in the DeWitt Park National and Local Historic Register, and it's at 100% corner in the City of Ithaca. So in the agenda packet, I see that the resolution authorizing the deconstruction of the properties located at 300 and 308 North Tioga Street, City of Ithaca, is up for discussion, which involves the deconstruction of the two buildings. The two buildings are non-contributing in the historic district, but still have some merit on their own as works of two local and regionally known mid-century modernist architects who were based in Ithaca. So we have some suggestions, and I'm also going to leave this behind. I'll send this to Jordan when I finish so that goes part of the record, hopefully. This project should reflect best practices for project management and establish an orderly critical path. When the architect and the designers are selected after the RFP is issued, we believe we could look at the site as it stands now with the existing two buildings to determine whether parts or all of the existing buildings can be adaptively reused or integrated into the new center of government design. If this is not possible, deconstruction as defined by the industry itself and waste diversion should be considered next on the list and in keeping with Tompkins County excellent sustainability goals that have already been set forth. The resolution to deconstruct before you today could be rewritten to reflect best practices in construction management and include the possibility of that site. The site also sits, again, with the oldest historic district in Ithaca, the DeWitt Park Historic District, which was established in 1971. While the two buildings are considered non-contributing, the proposed project sits within that district, and it is adjacent to the historic Boardman House and the Lake and Baldridge designed County Courthouse building, where we are now, both of which are significantly, I'm sorry, not this building, that building, both of which are significant historic buildings within this local and national registered district. Any new design and construction must take the proximity of the historic buildings into consideration in order to maintain community goodwill and support for a new center of government. Sorry, we're not in that courthouse. Sorry, it's the other courthouse. Short histories and photo documentation will be completed for the Historic American Building Survey, a documentation unit of the National Park Service. So you can see it in the Library of Congress when it's finished on the website, because these two mid-century commercial buildings are increasingly disappearing from our landscape nationally. Here in Tompkins County, we're definitely losing them. So Tompkins County, over the years, has had a track record of doing innovative and progressive initiatives that lead the way with their peer counties across the state. Tompkins is known for thinking outside the box, so we'd be happy to share with you a slide deck of other parts of buildings that were reused in new construction, including local examples like Ironworks and the Carey Building here in Ithaca. So thank you for this opportunity to speak to you, and we're happy to discuss any ideas, as we did on the Red House, which was a huge success thanks to you. So thank you, and I'll give you these for the record. Thank you again.
Thank you, Susan. Jordan, is there any other public comment? Okay, thank you. We'll move on then for minutes approval. Can I get a motion to approve the last meeting's minutes? Veronica? Second by Rich. Any comments? Can we just do this? Do we have to do a roll call?
You have to do a roll call, yeah. Because Annie's...
Ann's not voting.
Annie's not voting?
Not voting.
Oh, okay, well, then we can just raise our hands.
I see all in favor? Thank you. Sorry about that, Dan. The chair and vice chair report, do you have anything to comment on, Susan? Just to comment quickly, the county is looking at this very seriously, and we do want to set an example as to what's going to happen at this location and for the building itself. We have many departments working on this, including our planning and sustainability departments and our recycling solid waste, and we're looking at all the reuse possibilities there are, and I think we're going at this at a good pace. We're not rushing it. So this has probably been how many years has this been going along so far? So I think we're moving at a good pace. So and move on to the county administration report.
Okay. So for county administration, the first item I have is the update on the departmental placement within the center of government and a resolution. Following that, I can provide a little background before we get to the resolution. So after our last committee meeting, the Downtown Facilities Committee, I've incorporated some of the feedback from that meeting, and that feedback is reflected in changes in the resolution itself. So it now incorporates the departments from the Human Services Annex within the Center of Government building. It calls for the sale of the calls for the sale of the Human Services Annex after those departments have moved into the Center of Government. Also, based on the feedback that the committee wanted to see that we maximize the space utilized in the old jail, we have made a change there in placing assigned counsel, planning and sustainability, and ITC/TC in the old jail with the DA in the Center of Government. Part of the reason for that change is that after we've since found that 1,000 square feet of space is no longer needed for the DA for the grand jury, that can take place in shared space within the courthouse. This serves to maximize the space utilized in the old jail, and it eliminates the need for the district attorney's functions to be split over 2 floors, which would have to take place if the district attorney were placed in the old jail. And there was consideration given to forward-facing departments and the planning and sustainability. While there are proximities to be gained by having planning and sustainability in the Center of Government, they are not a forward-facing department, and so they could be placed in the old jail. So those are the changes since the last time you've considered the resolution, and I think that's it. I'm happy to answer questions.
Do you want to get the resolution on the table first, folks? Make a motion, Greg, in a second, Deborah. And this is for a resolution designating replacement of departments within downtown facilities, resolution 12104A. Any comment? Rich?
I think this is a good proposal, and I will support it. I did have a question about election machine storage, that the per square foot price is pretty high to build a new building to do warehousing of election machines. I was curious about the old jail in that it seems like that's a big building for what's in there. And there had been a proposal to take out the boilers, the old boilers that are not used in the basement. Would it be possible to put the election machine storage over there and save some of the use? in the new building?
Arel, we're more than welcome to come up, Arel.
So there was some consideration given, and Arel, please jump in. First, about the need and desire for Board of Elections to be in close proximity to their machines for working on them and security, and the forward-facing nature of Board of Elections. I would have to look at the square footage if that in and of itself prohibited Board of Elections from being in the old jail. And then there is in either location, the machine storage would be subgrade. They would be, in the basement and would require an elevator to move them out. But Arel, do you have anything further on that?
No, I think what you've explained is correct. At either building, we would have to put in a freight elevator, not only, well, at least to the center of government, we would already have one there for other needs in the building, in the basement of the building. So it wouldn't be an additional cost just for Board of Elections storage. At the old jail, you don't come into a floor at grade. As you know, you're kind of mid-level. You've got to go either up or down. For the basement access, it wouldn't be large enough, even with the removal of the boilers, because we have other equipment on the other side of the wall to put in all the voting machines. Plus, we'd have to put in a freight elevator, and you would probably have to access it from the outside, which we would not like. Otherwise, you'd have to do a lot of deconstruction within the building to tie in. There's a stairwell on the backside and put an elevator there. It probably could be accomplished, but it would be a lot of work to do for that. There used to be they used to feed the boilers with coal, so there's a little chute, but it's not large enough for an elevator. So that's the challenge at the old jail. I think if
How
it
many
was
square
an
feet are we
at-grade,
talking about?
I think right now they're leasing 3,000 square feet up at 3,200 square feet up at Hanshaw. And so we don't have that in the basement.
I mean, whatever our per square foot price is, that's going to be a tremendous amount of money to pay for storage, which is what I'm wondering about. I mean, we don't really have to make that decision today, but I'd like us to perhaps think about that further, if there's another solution that would be more cost efficient.
I agree. I know that Board of Elections indicated when we did the interviews with them for the space study and then updates that they would prefer to have storage in the same building. Prefer. It's not required. As you know, they've been up on Hanshaw for many years. So I think if it's not in the same building, that it proximate, within the city, let's say. So I know that's a possible option, but at this point, we are planning to have it in the center of government. I think once we get designers and do schematics, we can look at the costs and look at other options possibly.
I had a second question, if I could.
Yes, Rich, go ahead.
Again, the old jail, it seems like planning, TC and assigned counsel wouldn't use up the whole building. Is the plan that would be an area where future growth could be accommodated? Or is it really filling up the whole old jail?
It's not filling up the entire building, but yes, there would be growth either for departmental growth or even for agencies that the county is funding. I mean, initially, a few years ago, we had considered the old jail just for agency use and all the departments going in the center of government. So now we've actually have just county departments, but I think it is possible.
There is some room.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Any other comments from anybody? Yeah, Mike?
I just want to say that no matter what we recommend as far as this, I don't think we're going to carve it in stone during this process of building this building. There may be reasons when the architects and engineers are looking at this that we may have to make adjustments. And I just thought we should say that on the record, that changes can happen, probably not major ones, but it's important to know that we have some flexibility.
Deborah?
So following on that, Mike, I guess what we're doing here is just making a space assignment so we can determine how much space we need in the new building.
Yeah.
Lisa?
Exactly. I was going to say the exact same thing, Deborah. And I also included another whereas, which is final determination of departmental placement will be subject to confirmation in the schematic design phase.
Any other comments from everybody?
I'd like to add so that you understand that when we bring on a consultant, we're looking not only design of the center of government building, but also renovation of the existing building. So they, we'll work with them as we look at placement of departments that either are not going in the building or make changes. And so that whereas that Lisa just mentioned is one that we discussed a while ago to include, because we don't want you to get the impression that this is set in stone. There's going to be a lot of flexibility, and once we go through that schematic phase, I think there will be a lot of questions that we'll bring to this committee for some decisions.
Anybody else? Or? I'd just like to comment that I agree with Rich. That was one of my issues with storage for election machines. I realize there's a lot of them, but it seems like expensive to do that. But I'm sure it's an expense we're going to have someplace. I also want to just say that I appreciate the administration and Arel and everybody planning, all the people involved, and kind of trying to figure out what departments should go. This is a good step forward. And also, I think that the county is very focused on minimizing our impact to the city, to the environment, and also to the historic district. I think DeWitt Park is really crucial to the city, and the Boardman House is also there. So I'm sure we're really focused on just the aesthetics of how things are going to look, but also minimize their impact. So I just wanted to share that. Ann, go ahead.
Thanks for letting me speak up, Randy. And just to know for other folks, but the address of what my location was inadvertently left off of this this agenda, probably because I'm a new committee member. So thanks for letting me speak up, though. So I'm sure we'll deal with this later, but just wanted to put that out there as far as when we look at how much each department is going to need. So I heard Arel say, I believe it was 3,200 that is being leased now for the election machines. So that would be handy. Again, we'll probably have that, but later to know, what is the exact square footage that they will need for the election machines, because just because they're leasing 3,200, maybe they could use less. Thank you.
They're crammed in there pretty tight.
Yes, Mike.
Just that these electronic machines, I think, you have to be careful about the climate where they are, too.
Yes, they have to be stored and climate controlled, and they have to be kept secure.
Okay, so we have this resolution on the table. Why don't we do a roll call on this? George, did we do a roll call on this? Okay.
Randy Brown,
Yes.
Susan Curry,
Yes.
Deborah Dawson,
Yes.
Rich John,
Yes.
Michael Lane,
Yes.
Greg Mezzi,
Yes.
Veronica Pillar.
Yes.
Great, motion passed. We're moving along here. Deborah?
Yeah, just a little piece of supplemental information on the Board of Elections machine storage. Lisa tells me it costs $45,000 a year for us to rent that space. So that's something to consider when we're deciding how much it actually costs to build space for them. Thank you.
For 10 years, that's $500,000.
Yeah.
Okay, we're moving along, and we're going to move on to, want to talk, Lisa, about deconstruction of the K-Bank building, or do you want to get the resolution on the board first?
Sure, you can put the resolution.
I get a motion, get the resolution for authorizing the deconstruction of the properties located at 338 North Tioga Street. Deborah, and seconded by Greg. And all yours, Lisa.
So once again, taking the feedback of the committee at the last meeting and having some conversations, further conversations with colleagues at the city and with Arel on a proposed timeline for deconstruction of the two buildings, we have brought forth this resolution, which calls for them being taken down 12 months prior to the anticipated start of the construction, which is estimated to be February of 2025, that they would be taken down, and with the construction to begin February of 2026. And the reason for this is to provide sufficient time for the elements of the deconstruction, as we've been hearing from members of this committee and feedback to this committee about the process for deconstruction and preservation of certain elements and so forth. So that would allow sufficient time for that to happen.
Thank you. Any comments? Deborah?
Well, I have a question raised by the public comment from Professor Minner about wanting us to have the design team engaged and involved before the deconstruction. Do we have a timeline for when we're going to have a design team start looking at this?
Meaning a consultant. So
An architect.
yes. So the resolution that the committee just passed now gives us the information that we need in terms of size and square footage of the building to release an RFQ for that consultant and design firm. And so we would hope within the coming few months that we would be able to get responses and select. So I believe our original timeline was by April of 2024, maybe close to that, April, May-ish.
So we will have that process in full steam ahead before we take the buildings down. Thank you.
Yes, Rich?
Yeah, just commenting further on that, it seems like the two buildings should be considered separately. Having walked through them and gotten advice of our facilities director, it seems like they're different propositions. It might be possible to reuse the Key Bank building in some measure, but the professional building is on slab, so there is no foundation. You really couldn't build up from there without digging underneath it, I believe. And the interior is at a state where I really think there wouldn't be a lot of reuse that could be incorporated into a new building. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I think proceeding with removal of the professional building and starting the deconstruction sooner on that building is probably appropriate. Maybe we need to think further and get design professionals to advise us on the Key Bank building, but I think we're there on the other one, my view. Thanks.
Yes, Deborah?
Well, that raises another question. I've watched the deterioration, steady, gradual deterioration of that professional building for years now, while it's been occupied. And I do have a question. Assuming we pass this resolution as it's written, which I intend to vote for, do we have the flexibility to accelerate the timeline, at least on the professional building, if its deterioration starts to pose some real safety concerns?
Under that, or?
Well, as it's written now, this resolution ties the deconstruction of the two buildings together. And no, I think that we would need to separate. And it suggests the timeline of next February. So.
But I guess if some emergency situation arises, we could probably reconsider by another resolution. I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention because that building is really falling apart. Thanks.
Mike first, okay.
Yeah, I expected a resolution that authorized proceeding with deconstruction now. I can't believe that we're going to sit here and have those buildings secured and have to maintain heat and other kinds of things in them for a year before we even get started. As far as reusing the features of the Key Bank building, for example, we had a long discussion about that when we sold the old library site. There were people that said, well, we're going to be able to use some of the foundation of this. And I don't think they used very much of it. They might have used some of it. But I think you can spin your wheels a long way on that. The downtown, or rather the Facilities and Infrastructure Committee already authorized the deconstruction of the legal building. And we thought we would add it into this resolution, just again, so it was coming out of this committee as well. I'm just totally surprised that we're talking now about waiting a year.
Rich?
Yeah, Mike, I agree with what you said largely. And certainly, I was saying maybe the Key Bank building could be reused, but I don't think that argument can be made at all in regard to the professional building. And I share your view that we shouldn't be waiting a long time to get started, that Veronica and I were talking just before this meeting about deconstruction and how in other states in our country, they actually have viable deconstruction businesses, like in California and the Pacific Northwest, but their systems are different in terms of the time available to do the deconstruction. And the way our structure is set up with getting approvals, you can't start deconstruction until your new construction is approved. And so for private developers, it's just not economically viable to do deconstruction the way we'd like to see it done. We have the opportunity to do it well here, and it's time. And we have the time if we start now to really do an effective deconstruction. I'd love to see us be an example of how it can be done. But waiting and then doing it, we're going to do a crappy job of it. So again, I'd like to start on the professional building, and then if we can, start on the Key Bank building. But time. My view. Thanks.
Ashley, Greg?
So I'm just trying to understand what some of my colleagues are saying around deconstructing or reusing it in the new building, because those are two different things.
Yes, sir.
And if we reuse it in the new building, personally, the cost benefit to me, I can't wrap my mind around that. The engineering expense that will be, the additional construction costs that will be incurred. When most of the Key Bank, is that brick or is it a?
Key Bank?
No, the exterior.
No,
It's all metal?
Metal.
Metal and glass.
All right, so there's a reuse for that. I mean, like when we look at the dental building, a majority of that was reused on that site because we crushed up the concrete block and the concrete and put it as essentially structural fill. So a significant portion of that building remained on the site. It was really just interior wood, steel, and other building materials that were removed. And most of the metal, I'm assuming 100% based on the contractor and how they work, that was taken for salvage. So I think we're kind of getting caught up in something that may not be fully worth the expense, especially with those two buildings. I personally don't see how it's going to cost us any less to incorporate that building. I think it will cost us actually significantly more to incorporate that building into new construction. I agree with Mike Lane's comments on not waiting 12 months. I think that line does a little bit contradict, I think, the intent of previous discussions that we had at this committee and in the F&I committee, with not wanting to carry the cost of buildings that we ultimately knew the end of life was imminent. So I don't know. I don't see incorporating it into a new facility something that I would be supportive of, because I just think, we're sitting here talking about 3,000 square feet of expense for voting machines, which to have secure space for that, I think is paramount. I don't necessarily know if this is a paramount activity or if this really should be the test case to prove the example that we then want private developers to learn from to grow a market for salvage materials when the process in the city for private developers is such that it can't really support that process. So what are we really, what are we really doing? And I think we should strike the 12-month prior, and I think we should move forward with a salvaged demolition as best we can.
I know Chair Carroll has been working on some of this deconstruction things, and I'd like him to comment.
Yeah, so based on the conversation that we had at this last meeting, Kat McCarthy and I, and Kat's on the Zoom so she can chime in here, had a conversation with Crowd and some other folks, Historic Ithaca, Jenny Minner and some others. And I want to pass on their offer first to this committee to come in and talk a little bit more about what is deconstruction, what is salvage, what are the differences and what could be the benefits. I think there's a real effort that's going on in this community to try and create a circular economy in a way that there can be more of that salvage and try and change the processes. And I think that they see this as an opportunity for Tompkins County to lead the way. So I do want to throw that offer out there from them. There were a couple other offers that were made. One was from Professor Felix Heisel up at the Circular Lab at Cornell, and he's basically offered to use a tool that they've developed called ScanR to go into the buildings and see what would be possible to be salvaged, what are the value of things, so that a better deconstruction process might occur. That we're understanding what are we taking out of these buildings, what are the potential for them, where can they go, and that there are opportunities out there to find funding to help not completely negate, but to help truncate some of the costs, the added cost that there might be with doing a deconstruction versus a salvaged effort. So, I think there's two different things to look at. There's the adaptive reuse piece of it, where yes, that might not be possible with the buildings in their current state and with what the county has envisioned, but there are also all the materials that are in those buildings and thinking about how they can be reused. And it's not just about, putting an outside facade or using it for fill. I think there's a lot more to it than that. And so I think I would encourage folks to think about that. What we talked about last time is that now with buildings being built so much more efficient, with more renewable energy being built, with our green building policy, the most amount of emissions from this process is going to come from the construction of this building. And how you reduce those emissions is by looking at how do you reuse previously used materials, how do you invest in materials that have lower carbon emissions. And so, please consider that when you're going through this process. I don't want to speak to the timing of anything, but I do think that there is, a real opportunity for the county to demonstrate leadership when it comes to true deconstruction and not just, a salvage and take, what basic things you can take out of it, but really looking at how do we help create this circular economy.
Deborah?
Yeah, well, God, there's so many pieces of this. I guess I have some questions and then some comments. So we decided to deconstruct or demolish with salvage, whatever it is we're doing, together, because there were cost efficiencies to doing both buildings at the same time. So now we are starting to talk about doing them on different timelines, and it would seem to me that that would increase our expense. Is that correct? I see Arel shaking his head, yeah. So I hear what you're saying, Terry. And I hear Ms. Minner's or Professor Minner's contributions to this from a very academic perspective. It would be nice if the county could lead on these sustainability and innovation initiatives that people with very technical knowledge understand. But this is not an educational laboratory. This is building a center of government using public funds. And my concern is that we try to balance the interests of historic Ithaca and, circular economies and people who want to see us do this in a way that meets academic standards for deconstruction and reuse against the interests of the county and staff to get this done, because we've got people sitting in closet-sized cubicles, and the interests of our taxpayers in doing this in a cost-effective manner. So I guess at the end of the day, what I'm asking is that the people who come to us with very specialized interests that they want to see us meet and exercise understand that we have to balance a much larger set of concerns. And this is not, in the end of the day, going to meet their standards for what they would like to see happen. I just don't think it's consistent with my responsibility to my taxpayers to incur limitless additional expense to meet these standards that honestly I don't think anybody on this committee understands. So I hope people will take that into account, because it seems to me, just listening to the comments I heard this morning, that there's no way that we're not going to disappoint a lot of stakeholders and community members who have an idea about how they want to see this thing play out. Yeah, I guess that's all I can say.
Thank you. Ann Corman?
Thank you. So according to this resolution, the timeline is for new construction to possibly begin February 26, and this deconstruction projected to be February 25. So that's a year from now. I can't suggest an amendment, but I'm just wondering if somebody from the committee would consider adding in some language on line 19 where it says authorized to deconstruct, that we could add in something about considering options in line with best practices in construction and waste management, including adaptive reuse by the design team, something like that. Because that's just having us consider that, and then, yes, the buck stops here. This is to be considered with, as we look at demolition of the building, do we want to, if there's extra cost, do we want to pay for that? Is this going to delay our construction? And this gives the community time to, or maybe for us to work with the community to see if there's some way that some of the costs, extra costs, could be offset. I think worst case scenario, if nothing really can be done, it definitely highlights the need for more systematic procedures and systems in the community to help with deconstruction and reuse. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Greg?
It would seem to me that if establishing the circular economy around reuse and leading the way, that we would have modified the first resolution we passed in the 55,000 square foot facility that we're proposing, because that's our largest opportunity to be a contributor to the circular economy with building materials that we select, with reusing things in that construction. Instead of sort of cherry picking on the demolition, I don't know, it seems like if we really want to create this economy, we would do it on the construction side as well, not just on the demolition. And I'm just surprised that by those advocating for this made no mention in the construction of the new facility, but just in the demolition of the old. And I guess I would look to a rel of what type of materials would it be potentially possible for in the new construction? Or is this, I mean, are we just sort of living sort of like a half-truth here? If we're doing all of this on the deconstruction, but we're saying we're going to have all fresh lumber, all fresh steel, all fresh everything else. On the new construction, we're sort of lukewarm on the topic, in my opinion.
I'll say, but in our green building policy that was recently passed, we do address that construction side of things, where we do try and encourage reuse, and we do encourage using materials with lower embodied carbon in it. So that already exists in our green building policy.
So do we have the potential, and is it clear enough that we're using essentially salvaged materials or deconstructed materials in the construction? Or is it just that we're going to put the cutoffs from the 2x4s in a separate bin, and we're going to put the steel cutoffs in another bin, rather than it all going down the chute into one large dumpster? Like, what's the real intent of that policy? Or is it, okay, we're going to buy steel that has a greater percentage of recycled steel in it?
I think it's a little all of the above, right? I think it's trying to do each of those different things, and the policy has to be broad enough because there's, it has to encompass projects where there won't be any, demolition. It'll be a complete, construction from the ground up where there won't be a pre-existing building. And so it doesn't go in specifically and saying you must deconstruct a building and then reuse every element of the building, but it does just kind of leave it broad enough that we're trying to reduce total embodied carbon. How you get there is kind of left open deliberately so that we can choose the most cost-effective manner to get there.
So could we also have that approach in the selective salvage or deconstruction, demolition of a building, where we say ultimately you're going to demolish something, right? It's going to cease to exist. How we do that, should we not leave broad strokes to be able to figure out how we do that and look to our contractors and staff persons to identify what the broadest strokes are to do that in a sustainable but also cost-effective way?
And I think that that's what groups are asking for, essentially, is to just, not slow down the process, but just be more mindful of the process and look for those opportunities, and not just say, okay, let's deconstruct the building or let's demolish the building, but to look for those opportunities of what can be reused, to go into the building and catalog and inventory what exists and how it can possibly be reused. There's a whole other element of the adaptive reuse of the building that I'm not getting into. I understand that doesn't seem to be the way the committee wants to go, but it's the materials themselves that I think are the concern in that sense.
So in my mind, I don't see any objection to passing this resolution as it's stated and using that 12-month period for whomever to bring any form of a resolution to identify what those processes may be. And at midnight in February 2025, if nothing has been passed, then we still have a path to go forward, and we're not holding up any timeline. Even though I would, to Mike's earlier point, like to see these down sooner and not have the carrying costs and all of those type of things. And hey, if we get something 2 months from now that says this is how it should be done and we can accelerate the timeline, then let's move it up. But I don't think passing this slows that process in any way or inhibits the process to look for creative ways to support reuse and salvage and deconstruction.
Veronica?
Katie's got her
Thanks,
hand.
but I'll go after Katie.
Okay, Katie, go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to make sure the committee is also at this time considering just kind of the best practices on planning of the negative impact of a cleared site in the corner of the city in a prominent location for an extended period of time. I personally was heartened to see the 1-year timeline between deconstruction and construction, just realizing that at that point we'll already have an architect on board, we'll be far along in the planning process, we'll be pretty certain that this building is going to go up in a year, and it alleviates the risk of a cleared corner in the city being there for an extended period of time. And I do have concerns about that and wanted to make sure the committee knew that.
Thank you. Yes, Veronica?
Thanks. I guess I have a comment and a complex question that Katie answered part of. About the deconstruction or this whole argument we're having, I feel like I'm hearing people say things along the lines of, we can't possibly do this perfectly, so why bother? And maybe that's not what anyone means, but I really don't want to go down that road. Okay, great, then I'd love to hear clarifying later. I think that because this is a public building with public funds being like described and designed in a public place with someday a public-facing website about it, which I don't know if that exists yet, but this is a great time to be able to showcase more, what in the world do you call it? More like sustainable renewal use of materials, both in the deconstructing of existing buildings and in the construction of new ones. I don't know exactly what that'll look like. I think that's why we bring in experts. I don't know anything about traditional building construction either, so I'll just put that on the record, that anything I vote for is going to be me approving something out of my expertise because we're including the input from experts. But I think this would be a great, I don't know, like Rich said, this would be a great time to be an example of showcasing what sort of more sustainable construction could be. It's going to be a public-facing building. There could be educational pieces in the built environment. I personally am not going to design them. It sounds like, and we don't have to decide today, that there's lots of people interested in the circular building economy who would be excited to participate in some kind of project like this, who would probably not be lending their labor if we just try to push forward and do things faster. And then my question is, because I do feel kind of underinformed, is a year, how long, do we have an estimate of how long deconstruction on whatever scale would take, or how much time is needed before it starts? I see we have like a year and a year in this resolution. And I'm also curious about what are the, and this is I guess something Katie just spoke to, what are the downsides or costs of leaving the buildings up and empty for longer, whether it's like costs for utilities or the deterioration of just not maintaining them. And then also, what are the downsides of costs to having more time with just no building and an empty lot? It's probably too complex to answer now, but I would love a general overview illustration of that to guide my thinking. Thanks.
Yes, Susan?
I just wanted to say I had the great experience of working with our county facilities for some major construction projects and renovations. It wasn't taking a building down, but I have been incredibly impressed by the dedication and the commitment to sustainability. And I appreciate all of the comments from Aurel and Terry. I think that we should be guided by our staff, and I don't think this resolution prevents anything that we're talking about in terms of the green building policy or sustainability, and that we could pass it, and as things are discovered, they could guide us. And we already have had great connections with Historic Ithaca and all of our experts. I think that we should move ahead.
Thank you. Yes, Mike? Do you have your hand up, Mike?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I had my hand up.
And me too.
You know, this is kind of interesting to me, and Greg, I do think this will slow things down. At the F&I committee, some of us wanted to take a little more time with this $40 million project and look at some of the possible reuse of the buildings over there. And a majority of the committee decided they wanted to move it ahead real fast. And that went to the full legislature, and the legislature agreed with that. And that's why this committee is existing. Now we want to slow this thing down. And I'm sorry, but I believe it will slow things down if we don't move ahead. I heard Katie's suggestion here, but we aren't talking about taking the buildings down and leaving them vacant for a huge, long time. Like was done when they did the urban renewal in the city of Ithaca and took down the old Rothschild's building, for example, and it sat there for years before they could ever figure out how to put a building into it. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about moving ahead with a project we're about ready to hire engineers and architects to advise us on. So that's the problem I'm having with this 12-month thing here. And I'll get it on the table. And Ann, I can't agree with adding that language that you're talking about. Not that we won't be using it. We talked about deconstruction with the dental building. None of these issues came up when we waited over a year for deconstruction. We went through and used the elements. We had different groups come through and take what they wanted. Maybe that wasn't, now we're being criticized for using the term deconstruction for that, but I think it was a reasonable process that we used. What I'd like to do is move an amendment, and we'll just see if it works or not. I would like on the first resolve to delete everything after City of Ithaca on line 20 in that resolve.
Seconded by Rich. Any comment on that? Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, I was going to make the same motion, actually. I don't see that putting in a time limitation helps us in any way. This gives us more flexibility. It gives us more time to do the deconstruction, to do it in a cost-efficient way. I take Deborah's point that we don't have unlimited resources, and we shouldn't be applying them to the deconstruction piece of the project because it's taxpayer money. But with more time, you can do it more cheaply. Having participated in the partial deconstruction of a house in Collegetown last year, as well as salvaging from several others, there's ways to do this at pretty low cost if you're thoughtful about it. And we should be a leader. I think giving us more time to do it helps us. It doesn't hurt us in any way. I take Katie and the professor's point about we shouldn't have an empty lot. You know, there's competing goals here. Do we want a good deconstruction? Do we want immediate construction? I favor, let's do the deconstruction well. If we've got an empty lot for a period of time, we know we're going to build a building. This is, as Mike said, this is not the old Rothschild situation where it really damaged our core downtown years and years ago because it was empty for so long. We're going to build. I'm very comfortable with that. And yeah, let's get rid of the artificial limit here.
Any other comment on the amendment?
So just want to clarify. So all that resolved would say is on recommendation of the Downtown Facilities Committee that the Tompkins County Administrator or her designee be authorized to deconstruct the properties, period.
Located at 300.
Right. But that would be the end of the sentence.
Yes, that's my, basically, the rest of that sentence comes out.
I want to just try to understand my colleague's
I
intent.
think Deborah wasn't done.
Oh, sorry, we done?
Oh, Deborah, you were done? I'm sorry.
Well, I just want to say that I had some comments that I wanted to respond to my colleague, Dr. Pillar, but with respect to this offered amendment, I think what we're looking for here is flexibility. Yeah, I would love to have the resources that Terry mentioned come in here and explain what our various spectrum of options is. And at the same time, I want to give us flexibility in terms of time. So if we just pass a resolution that says the county administrator can move forward with deconstruction, that gives us time flexibility. It also gives us the time to learn more about the project, the options that we have for deconstruction versus demolition with salvage. And we don't have a resolution that ties us to any particular timeline or any particular process. I think flexibility is really important here because it seems to me that we've got a ton of different options that we could pursue.
Greg?
To that point, I don't know if this creates flexibility or just confusion, because I'm just wondering from the staff's perspective, at what point are they authorized to engage in the deconstruction? Once we pass another resolution that says this is how you deconstruct it? Or does Orel call tomorrow and put out an RFP and then we're all upset, but we passed a resolution that said deconstruct? I think there's a lack of clarity, and I don't want to, and so please, Mike and Rich, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed that Mike was coming from a place of a more immediate deconstruction, and it seemed that Rich was coming from a place of not being limited by 12 months, but potentially being able to expand beyond that 12 months for a proper deconstruction. So I'm trying to understand the intent or the conflicting intents of the deletion of this section. So without clarity on intent, I'm not supportive of the amendment, because I think the 12 months gives us a defined period to create some of those opportunities for excuse me, a successful deconstruction, but also puts an end date on, if nothing is presented by then or done by then, this is what we're working under pressure to get this done.
How would you reword it to resolve that confusion? Because that's a fair point.
I think the way that it's stated does that, unless the intent of the committee members in passing that amendment is to, we pass it, it goes to the ledge, it gets passed, and we begin deconstruction. Which I think, but I don't want to infer the intent of the member who made the amendment.
If you're asking me, Greg, the question is to be able to move ahead with this. The process, just like the deconstruction of the dental building, may take time. And it may take, we may want to listen to these folks that want to come in during that. But I don't want to have to wait a year before we start doing that.
Okay, I want to comment on this because lots been covered. So Susan and I met with Lisa and Katie and went over and talked about the timeline of this and whether this would even affect the timeline that we currently have in place, and it would not. So there's 12. So waiting for 12 months doesn't affect our timeline or billing at all. So would you agree with that, Lisa?
I think maybe the clarifying point is, and I understand the competing interests and what you're trying to balance and achieve here. So I think what we were defining as deconstruction was actually the buildings being razed or taken down versus the process of having these conversations, consulting with others, going through and taking out the interior contents, which can be happening for the next year, and we can be getting the contractors in place to actually come and do the actual deconstruction by February of next year.
Deborah?
So that was one question that I had when Mike said he thought it would slow things down. I had actually thought that we were going to move forward with this much more quickly, the deconstruction part. But realistically, how soon would we be ready to move forward with construction on the new building? Because if the timeline for that, a realistic timeline for that is not until February of 2026, then really, we have 2 years to deconstruct these buildings, and the question then becomes, what is it costing us to leave them in place for 6 months or 12 months or 18 months?
I think that when we met, our goal was also to move the deconstruction down as quickly as possible. So after discussion, and we also want to be sensitive to, or I do, to working within the city. And their concerns that they may have, I've not heard them, of an empty lot. So the thought process, and to Rich's comment, we're going to move ahead, we're going to build this building, and they need to know that, right? So it's not going to be like, remember City of Ithaca, where that was built? How many years was that empty? I mean, 5, 6, 7 years? So I think that so we met in the middle. We said, you know what? When can we take these buildings down without affecting the rest of the timeline? And how quickly can we do that? So our original thought was, hey, can we do it this spring, summer?
Right.
I mean, that's pretty quick. And actually, I'm not opposed to another resolution to taking the law building down faster, which I think we can do at a later date, right? But I think that the Key Bank building, I think the chances of reusing or using that building again is slim to none. But there is a lot of product in there. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to take a little time for us to do this correctly. And I do want to set an example. We need to, understanding our cost, we don't want to do that. And I think there's maybe some revenue that could be generated for some of that. And hopefully some grants to maybe help us with that process. So which would give us some time to get some grants. We need to get some time to do that. So I think that the timeline we're on, good. I don't support the amendment. Rich.
Surprise. I've heard some different things here, and maybe we add something to clarify deconstruction from final removal, because it sounded like what you were talking about, Lisa, was final removal of the building February 25. I think we could say, let's begin deconstruction, take a year to do it, with the plan being final removal of the buildings in or around February 25, if that's what's intended, but it's not stated here that way. Right. And that we then begin learning about deconstruction, doing it immediately, right? With, then you're looking at perhaps having an empty lot for a year. But I think that would add some clarity. And certainly if there's still issues about what does deconstruction mean, as Greg raised, that's not addressed here either with removal of this language or with it in. It's not saying what that word means. Maybe we could ask for a report from the county administrator as deconstruction proceeds to tell us. But let's get going. So I would say get rid of the 12 months, but maybe add final removal of the building in or around February 25. Buildings.
Okay, we're still on the amendment here. So who was next? Deborah or Greg? I can't remember who was next.
Yeah. I guess we need to address this amendment because there's another option. We could just say that we're recommending authorization to deconstruct no later than 12 months prior, and then add some language saying to give the committee and the legislature time to receive input from the community on how best to deconstruct these buildings. But that's a different resolution it's a different amendment than what's on the floor, so.
Greg.
Yeah, I think you could simply just, in line 21, let's leave the last resolved, but on line 21, you could say 12 months, I'm going to start from 12 months. 12 months prior to the anticipated start of construction of the downtown county office building, with deconstruction to be completed by March 1st, 2025. And projected center of government construction to begin February 2026. I think that's simple, it's clear, and gives the idea to start the process as soon as we can, but we need to be done by a certain date, which in the timeline is about 12 months prior to the start of construction.
Does it still give staff the guidance that they need to decide when to start the process, which was your initial concern?
Yes, because I think we can make that the sense of this body to come up with deconstruction methods. I mean, we could add another resolve if that's, but I think not having any sort of timeline is where I was getting the confusion from. If we have a timeline, we can work back from there on how best to deconstruct, and Arel and Terry and Lisa can work with whomever to come back with a proposal to say, here's what we're suggesting. And we approve that method.
Okay, so we still have that amendment on there, but it's been modified a couple times.
Well, it really hasn't, because nothing's been moved. My feeling is the sense is that that goes too far. This doesn't go far enough. So we're looking for something in the middle. I mean, is that?
I'm open to that, Deb.
Okay. I think that when we started talking about this, the term deconstruction is unclear. So maybe we want to rethink this one. Do we want to leave this and rewrite it, or can we do this with a simple amendment? Or I like the timeline. I'm good with, what Greg said. I like what you pointed out. I'm fine with that. But I'm not sure I'm not experienced on these issues, so I'm not sure where to go with it. So, Deborah.
So if you wanted to send it back to staff, if we wanted more time to think about it, what we might consider is authorizing the removal of the properties, having the timeline issue addressed, perhaps the way Greg suggested, and then adding a resolution that we're going to be taking time to consider input from the community on methods of removal, to include demolition with salvage, or deconstruction, or deconstruction and reuse or incorporation of elements within the project. That seems to me that it would cover the broad spectrum of considerations that we've heard from the public comment today and from meetings that our DPS people have had and advice from Terry and Katie. I mean, this is, again, a really complex decision in terms of what exact process are we going to use to remove these properties. And if we use the word removal in the title of the resolution, then we accommodate the process of taking input and making our own decision on how we want to move forward. And at this point, I'd just like to address something that one of my colleagues suggested. I am not saying that if we can't do it perfectly, we're not going to do it at all. I just want our stakeholders to understand that whatever compromise we arrive at between perfect deconstruction and demolition is going to be a compromise based on finances to some extent And I just want people to be prepared for the fact that they're likely to be disappointed because we're not going to end up doing it perfectly. Thank you.
So how do we move forward from here? So where do we, Mike?
I like Deborah's suggestion to ask the folks at the administration to kind of reword this based on our discussion here. I don't think putting it over a month is going to delay us terribly here.
Yeah, okay with you, Lisa? Does that work?
Sure.
So what's the okay, Rich?
I was just going to say I agree with that, and it's certainly no secret, everybody in the room that's listened to this discussion, we can proceed with trying to far better define what do we mean when we say the word deconstruction. So in a month, we will know a lot more. I assume that Crowd and Historic Ithaca and others in the community that are interested will come to us and say, this is what we want to see. So I don't think it's a wasted month at all.
Greg?
And if we also get people that say, we don't want our tax dollars to go towards this, we need to be open to all viewpoints as well. Because I just think, right, that I think we should say all stakeholders and not specifically identify, because there are varying sides to this conversation that is important to incorporate so that we just aren't artificially
Absolutely.
leaning one way or the other.
As Deborah has said, we're in the disappointment business. That's what we do.
Is that what I said?
I disagree.
Yes, Deborah?
Procedurally, however, if that's the course we want to follow, we've got a resolution on the floor and an amendment on the floor, and those need to be withdrawn.
I'll withdraw my amendment.
Okay.
And should we withdraw the resolution that we're working on?
Yeah, who moved and who seconded? Okay, well, I'm in favor of withdrawing it then too, and we'll just.
Good with that, Greg?
As long, essentially, if we're postponing it to the next meeting.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it'll be a different resolution when it comes.
So my comment to Lisa and Arel and Terry, do you feel comfortable with the conversation and you'll be able to, a month from now, provide some clarity to us, or?
We're in the disappointment business also. We'll do our best.
All right, thank you.
It's been a really disappointing meeting.
Yes, Veronica?
Maybe related, something I would find helpful is some sort of report back on how the disappearance of, to avoid using any of these not defined words, of the dental building actually went. Because I only know from what I saw passing by and various comments, but an overview of the whole picture would be helpful to me.
Also, something I think that we've discussed or is on discussion at the F&I committee, which covers the 400 block. But
I think the comments of understanding what we possibly could do with those buildings, we have not had. So, I mean, as far as demolition, deconstruction, and reuse of materials, I mean, could the Key-Bank building could be, maybe he wants to buy it and move it and put it up someplace else. I mean, who knows? I mean, people do those types of things. I mean, it's expensive to do that. So
We'll
I
put
mean,
it up next to the
so, I
Freeze
mean,
Road Bridge.
who knows where it's going to go? But I think that would be the ultimate goal, is like reuse as much as we can of this, and setting that example, and to know the people we did the best we could, and understanding that, wait a minute, we can't do that because that's going to cost us $250,000. Right? So I think we're on the right page here. So is that everything?
Oh, the RFQ for architects and engineers update.
So
An update on RFQ process, is that what was next?
I think ultimately the first resolution that was passed authorizes us to now proceed with that process. And Arel, do you have anything further to?
Yeah, the draft is almost done. I'm reviewing through it again and keep adding things. I will a few things after today's discussion. Also, we're adding all the attachments of forms that need to be completed by the potential respondents. So I should have a draft ready for committee review by the next meeting.
Yes, Mike?
Oh, that's sort of what I was wondering, and because I think the committee ought to take a look at suggestions in the RFQ about the historic district and the downtown campus and the architectural compliance with other, I don't know what the exact word is, but having it be something that we're going to be proud of for 100 years.
Any other comments on that? I agree with that. Are there any committee members' reports at all? I think that's everything, guys. We covered a lot of ground, and I think we're adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you for herding cats, Randy.
It's fun to watch.